The fire is dying. Smoke billows back from the fire pit, stinging your face. Outside, the wind howls through the arrow slit, hurling snow sideways like sand. No chimney, no glass windows. The whole family lies pressed together, breath turning to white fog. If this fading red ember dies, the night wins, and someone must charge into the storm to borrow fire. You are in a stone room as damp as a freezer. You have 10 seconds to decide. Bank the coal or open the door. Choose. Because right after this, we are exposing how medieval people actually slept and survived bone-cracking cold nights. No heaters, no plush mattresses, just stone, smoke, and human heat. And what happens when that ember truly begins to die. Medieval people rarely slept through the night. They lived on a two-sleep rhythm. First sleep, then second sleep, with a quiet vigil in between. Modern sleep studies under conditions without artificial light show the body naturally splits sleep in two, waking on its own in the middle of the night. Historian A. Roger Ekirch confirms this wasn't strange. It was the age-old standard. After 3 to 4 hours of first sleep, people woke for 1 to 2 hours to pray, warm their hands over the coals, mend clothes, sharpen knives, or mix dough for the morning bake before returning to second sleep until the rooster crowed. Sound weird? It's not. It's the natural body clock when night is truly dark. That moment between sleeps was also the hour of the soul, both peaceful and fragile. But what kept them awake without coffee? And why was that pause the golden hour for making life or death decisions for the whole family? Forget the concept of a bedroom. For most peasant homes, it didn't exist. The main common room was the bedroom, the kitchen, the workshop, the storage shed, all in one. A proper bed? Forget that too. What they lay on was typically a straw-stuffed sack, a grass pallet, or just loose straw covered with an old piece of canvas. A better-off home might have a bag stuffed with sheep's wool, but the majority just had straw. The straw's thickness could be a hand span, maybe even a hand and a half if they were frugal. The thicker, the better the insulation from the cold ground. Straw traps small air pockets, acting like natural bubble wrap to separate the body from the damp earth. Every morning, they had to fluff the straw to air out moisture and chase off bugs. Sound inconvenient? Yes. But the damp earthen floor is the notorious heat thief. Lie directly on it, and you lose the battle from minute one. So if the straw is damp and matted, what other tricks did they have to avoid losing to the floor? And here is weapon number one against the cold night. Wool. Not the soft merino wool you're wearing. This was coarse wool, still heavy with sheep's grease, lanolin, thick, and possessing a magical property. It remains warm even when damp. Medieval people were masters of layering, linen on the inside to wick sweat, wool on the outside to trap heat, add a tunic, a vest, a cloak, a hat, and a scarf. They slept in all their clothes, sometimes even their boots. The reason was blunt. Taking off clothes means losing heat. If you have to relieve yourself mid-night, stepping barefoot on the damp ground sends a chill to the bone. Layers, not one thick garment, were the key. No time to layer? They'd pull whatever they could on top of themselves. Burlap sacks, old coats, an animal hide, a coarse curtain. But if damp wool is still warm, what happens when the smoke and humidity inside the house actually make the perceived warmth increase by a few degrees? Wait, humidity is good? The answer is yes. The right amount of humidity actually helps it feel a few degrees warmer than dry, arid air, especially in a stone room that sucks the heat from every breath. And the free source of humidity was livestock. Cows, goats, and chickens were herded into the house during bitter cold. It wasn't romantic, but it was effective. A large body like a cow radiates constant heat, and their breathing increases the room's humidity, reducing dry, scratchy throats. Their wheezing breath became an unintentional white noise machine. The smell? Yes. The noise? Yes. Warmer? Definitely. But by bringing animals inside, did the bugs decrease, or did they double? That's an uncomfortable question, and it leads to another nightly battle. Fighting the little guys. Fleas, lice, Rats, the trio that ensured the night was never peaceful. Warm, damp straw is a 5-star hotel for bedbugs. People would burn mugwort or juniper leaves, hanging bundles of herbs at the bed's head. It worked, but only briefly. A smelly sheepskin, ironically, was a decent armor against bugs. Furniture was pulled away from the walls to stop rats from climbing. Traps were set by the hearth. But you'd still hear the gnawing, the scuttling feet, and you knew, tonight we are still on watch. That's why medieval sleep was rarely deep, always one eye open. So how did they keep the fire without suffocating from smoke, with just enough light and warmth? In peasant houses and many castle rooms, they used a central fire pit. The smoke found its own way out, through a hole in the roof or through the gaps in the tiles. When you don't have a standard chimney, you have to tame the fire. Raise the hearth slightly so the hot air rises straight up. Hang the pot at just the right height so the smoke doesn't billow in your face. Most importantly, use thick bed curtains and wall tapestries to block drafts. The smoke stung the eyes and blackened the roof, but it was also a natural bug spray and cured the wooden beams, making them more durable and mold resistant. They also had the coal banking trick before bed, piling ash over a single red ember to be uncovered in the morning, saving firewood and avoiding the borrowing fire run in the snow. But if you accidentally buried it too tightly, the coal suffocated and died. Who would go to borrow fire, and how would they find their way? Going to borrow fire in a blizzard was no joke. Villages had night signals, a bell, or snow sticks. Long poles jammed into the ground along the path before the storm hit, so you could still find your way in a whiteout. Some homes kept a dried gourd or a small wooden box lined with ash to transport a hot ember. Others used a hollowed-out turnip as a temporary box. The fire borrower would wrap themselves in a wool cloak, covering their nose and mouth with a linen scarf. Outside, the wind would rip at the cloak, trying to pull them backward. Back home, the ember was dropped into the ash pit like a life-saving seed. Just one small spark was enough to light the whole room again. But if the cold was stone-splitting, besides straw and human heat, what other tricks were there to keep the bedding and feet from going numb? Right here, the classic hot water bottle. Hot stones, hot bricks. In the evening, bricks or stones were heated by the fire, wrapped in coarse cloth, and shoved to the end of the sleeping pallet or placed near the feet, preheating the straw that would be in contact with the body. Some placed them in an earthenware pot and drew the bed curtains tight to trap the heat. Warm hands and feet meant a night's sleep already half won. The wealthy had small brass boxes for coals, called foot warmers, but the poor just needed a smooth stone and a burlap rag. But stones can burn, so the mother would watch over it, occasionally lifting the cloth to see if it was too hot. Sound meticulous? Because one mistake meant a sleepless night. What about architecture? Was there any way to make the house warmer without a modern furnace? Of course. Architecture was the first line of defense. Northerners carved alcove beds into the wall or built box beds with curtains to trap warm air around the sleeper. Floors were slightly raised to create an air gap against ground moisture. Doors faced away from the prevailing wind. Roofs were thick with layered thatch. Walls were thick wattle and daub or stone to absorb heat from the fire and release it slowly. Some houses were even built half buried to take advantage of the stable ground temperature, which is always more stable than the air. A thick tapestry on the wall wasn't just decoration, it was a jacket for the stone. The singular goal: cut the wind, stop heat loss. But, no matter how smart the design, you still had to add fuel to your internal furnace. What do you eat when the refrigerator is the sky? The perpetual stew hanging over the fire was the heart of the home, the savior from cold and hunger. Every day, more roots, grains, dried greens, and bones were added. They'd scoop some out to eat, add more water, and the pot was never empty. On a cold night, a hot bowl was like pouring oil onto the body's biological furnace. Wild herbs like poor man's pepper, thyme, and mugwort cut the off flavors, added taste, and warmed the stomach. That was calories, and calories meant warmth. A full belly wasn't enough. You also had to dress right to beat the damp and drafts. The golden rule: linen layer inside, wool layer outside, add a cloak, hat, keep wrists and ankles covered. Critically, mittens. not five-fingered gloves. Keeping fingers together in one compartment is always warmer than separating them. Socks were stuffed with extra wool scraps, bits of rabbit fur, or even dried moss to create a thermal cushion. Shoes were tied loosely at night so as not to cut off circulation. You find this annoying? They found it life. But sleep wasn't just a thermal equation, it was a mental and spiritual one. Night was the hour of fear. When the fire dimmed, imaginations ran wild. Sleep paralysis, nightmares, the wind howling like a whisper. People hung bundles of street. John's wort sprinkled holy salt on the windowsill, placed a bowl of ash by the bed, and prayed before lying down. Everyone knew the hour between sleeps was when heaven was close, so they prayed, spoke softly. The night vigil wasn't just for adding wood, it was for guarding the soul. When you have no lights, no solid locks, and no clinic, you need a mental anchor to get through the night. And when war and famine struck, how did sleep distort? Soldiers slept in their soft armor and padded jacks, backs against a wall, hands never leaving their weapons. Villages under siege, houses burned, people napped on stone floors that hadn't even warmed up. The night was split into watch shifts, any strange sound and you were instantly awake. Hunger and exhaustion made sleep as thin as frost. Sleep, in this context, was just a pause from falling. Now, return to your stone room. The biological clock ticks. It's the vigil between two sleeps. You wake, poke the ash, and reveal a single red ember. A tiny, immense victory. You stoop to pull the bed curtain tight, adjusting the wall tapestry. You dip your hand into the water basin, the surface is taut, like glass. You nudge the hot stone closer to the child's feet. You hear the chicken cluck in the corner, its breath warming the air behind the curtain. Then you sit down, ready for second sleep. Why be so meticulous? Because sleep here isn't a luxury, it's fuel. Lose sleep and you'll walk slow, chop wood wrong, or fall while carrying water. And one mistake costs you everything. You ask, so how were the elderly and children protected? The answer? Absolute priority for the warmest spot by the hearth, behind the curtain, against the leeward wall. Newborns lay between two adults, the blanket pulled up to their ears. The father's boots, stuffed with dry straw, were placed beside them like a windbreak and ready for him to slip on in the morning. The elderly had the privileged animal hide and were turned closest to the hot stone first. Everything revolved around one goal, ensuring everyone was still breathing in the morning. But even with all this skill, they still lost to bugs and damp. Were there other ways to hack the room without modern tools? You bet. These were the little tricks. Building the sleeping platform, a hand span off the ground, laying oilcloth under the straw in damp spots, cutting the smoke hole to face the leeward sucking wind to reduce blowback, hanging bed curtains so thick they formed a tent within a room, stuffing fabric strips into door cracks, and stacking snow walls outside. Sound like wartime defense? Absolutely, because the cold night was an enemy that never slept. So, how effective was this system when the weather was truly brutal? The answer? Just effective enough to survive. Not cozy, not restful, just enough to stop shaking so hard your joints locked. Damp wool still insulated better than cotton, the right humidity soothed the skin, hot stones extended the straw bed's warmth, curtains and tapestries cut the drafts. Livestock raised the baseline temperature, banking the coals saved fuel. It all added up to enough. And enough in that era was a victory. Then, dawn creeps into the room. The ice on the window slit cracks and patterns like bird feathers. Everyone blinks, yawns. Their lips and hands cracked, but still strong. The ash is cleared, the live coal brought back to flame. The stew pot begins to bubble. Another night, the cold has been beaten. They stand, fold the canvas blankets, fluff the straw. Work waits. Another night will come with wind, smoke, breath, and that tiny red ember. And next time, if the ember dies, they will pull on their hats, grab the gourd, follow the snow sticks, and borrow fire again. Because their sleep wasn't an escape from life, it was the most resilient part of it, keeping each other warm so there would be people to work and people to live in the morning. You've seen the truth. Fairy tale castles are only warm in picture books. The reality is cold stone, crowded rooms, damp air, the smell of wool, smoke, livestock, and the sound of rats scratching the walls. But it was also a place where small skills saved lives. Wrapping a hot stone correctly, banking coal with precision, hanging a curtain in the right spot, layering in the right order. No detail was wasted. No one was left out of the circle of warmth. From first sleep to second sleep, from the mother's hand checking the stone to the father's feet, borrowing fire, it was all part of one story. The cold night is the test. And this group of people is the answer. And now, back to the opening question. If that ember is dying, what do you do? Deftly bank the coal to save it till morning, or throw on a cloak and charge into the storm to borrow fire? Comment with your answer below, bank the coal, or borrow the fire, and tell us why. If you want to see us build and test a 2-sleep night with straw, hot stones, bed curtains, animals, and a perpetual stew hit, like so the algorithm doesn't snuff out this video, subscribe and hit the bell for next week's episode. The cold night is long. Let's learn to beat it, one ember at a time.
This is it then. Life or death decisions.
Are we truly ready for this consequence?